Alright, we're going to be looking at my MagSorc build for PvE. Max Magicka is 39.8k, maximum health is 11.1k, maximum stamina is 10k, our spell damage is at 2105, and our spell critical is at 66.1. Our resistances right now are at 18.6 and 10.9. We're running all of our attribute points, 64 into Magicka, 0 into health and stamina. We are a Breton for the reduction of Magicka cost. I am not a vampire on this one. If you would like to be a vampire, stage 4 gives you more damage with fire or flame damage towards you, but you can drop that down to 2 if you would like to still get the passive for the Magicka recovery. We're using the Shadow Boonstone to increase our critical damage by 19% when you run all Divines on all of the pieces. We also have Minor Slayer with the set that we're using. We'll talk about Aegis and Prophecy a little bit later, and then we're using Ice Cream for our food for parse testing, which gives us the increased max Magicka of 4200, and the Magicka recovery for a little bit more damage and sustain as we're doing our parse. Next, we're going to be looking at what potions to run during the parse test. You want to run Essence of Spell Power. So the next thing that we're going to look at is some of the gear and weapon, what traits we want to have those in, what enchantments we want to have on those as well. The first one that we have is the Inferno Staff of Mother's Sorrow with Flame Damage Enchant, and it's imprecise. It gives you extra critical. We have the Maelstrom's Inferno Staff on the back bar with Weapon Damage Enchant and Infused. Also are wearing the Zaan's Visage, so heavy in Divines with Max Magicka. You have the Chest of Sororia's Robe, which is a light trial set with Max Magicka in Divines. Shoulders in medium for our 511 of Zaan's Divines with Max Magicka as well. Then we also have a Sash of Sororia's in light Max Magicka, Hands of Sororia's light Max Magicka, Divines, legs in light Divines, and feet in light Divines of Sororia's as well. And then for our jewelry, we have the Necklace of Mother Sorrow, the Ring of Mother Sorrow, and another Ring of Mother Sorrow. All of them have spell damage enchants on them, and all 3 of them are in the Bloodthirsty trait for the extra damage against enemies under 25% health by 10%. So first we're going to talk about Zaan's Visage. This is going to be the monster helm that you use to get your 511. You'll use your head in heavy and your shoulders in medium. This adds spell critical, and when you do damage with a light or heavy attack, you have a 20% chance to create a beam of fire that will connect to the enemy. It deals flame damage every 1 second for 5 seconds, and every second that it is up, it increases by 50%. So I put a little stone here to kind of give you an idea of about where 8 meters is to get this to proc. So once Zaan's procs, you're going to see a line of fire between your chest and the enemy. You'll notice if you back up more than 8 meters, it's going to break that, and it's going to go away. So you want to try to stay at least 8 meters or closer to your target when you're doing damage, so you don't break that and you get the full potential of the damage from Zaan's. So next we're going to look at the abilities that we're going to be using on the Sorc. First one is going to be Force Pulse, which does elemental damage. It's going to be Flame, Frost, and Shock damage. We're also going to be using Haunting Curse, which does magic damage and actually explodes twice, which I'll show you a little bit later of how that works. We're going to use Crystal Fragments as well. This has a chance of proccing where it costs less, and it does more damage as well. Bound Aegis is going to be our next one, And this is more for the passive of the 8% Max Magicka, and also you get Minor Resolve, which gives you a little bit more physical and spell resistance as well. Then we have Inner Light. This is going to be, once again, for Max Magicka, 5% extra Max Magicka, but it also gives you Major Prophecy, so you have 100% crit uptime with that ability. So it increases your spell critical by 2191, which is about 10%. Then for our ultimate, we're going to be using Shooting Star. This does flame damage to not only the person that it hits, but it also stuns them, knocks them down, does an additional amount of flame damage after it lands on the ground. It also generates ultimate by the amount of enemies that it hits. For our back bar, we have Unstable Wall of Elements. This is going to do flame damage. Anything that has burning on it will take 20% more flame damage. We're going to use Degeneration as well. This is going to make sure that our major sorcery is up if we're not using spell power pots especially, or if we forget to hit the spell power pots, so it increases our damage by 20% for 24 seconds and also does a big damage over time as well. Then we're going to use Barb Trap. Does a little bit of physical damage, not too much that we're caring about. The bigger thing about Barb Trap is that it gives us minor force, so it increases the critical damage by another 10% of that whole duration. We're also going to be having Bound Aegis on our back bar for that Max Magic and Resistances. Then we're going to use Hardened Ward for our shield, which gives us a damage shield of 6715 damage for 6 seconds. And this scales off of your max health. For the ultimate, we're going to be using Greater Storm Atronach. Basically, you drop down a Storm Atronach. It does a lot of direct damage, but the bigger thing is for groups is they can synergize off of it and get Major Berserker, which increases their damage done by 25% for 8 seconds. So now we're going to look at why we use some of the abilities. And the first one that we're going to look at is the Unstable Wall. And what this does is it does flame damage when you slam your staff down. Any enemy that has burning on it takes 20% more damage from the ability itself. And one reason that we run this as well is because of our enchant on our back bar. So when we look at the Maelstrom's Inferno Staff, we have the Weapon Damage enchant that increases our spell damage by 452 for 5 seconds. So when you drop Blockade down, what it's going to do is it's going to proc or make that effect happen with the extra spell damage. And when you switch back over to your front bar, it's going to carry you over to your front bar as well. So if you look at this, is when you slam your staff down using the wall, it'll put AoE on the ground, and you'll see a little sword down on your buff meter for 5 seconds, and then it starts back over again for another 5 seconds. So it actually enchants twice just off of Blockade. So we want to make sure that we keep that down as much as possible to get the most amount of damage. So the next ability that we will look at is Degeneration. And what Degeneration does is it does Magicka damage for just over 15,000 damage over 12 seconds. But it also gives you Major Sorcery, increasing your spell damage by 20% for 24 seconds. So this we can actually start before the Unstable Wall of Fire because it is 10 seconds worth of time. So we can actually put Degeneration every second rotation if we would like for the Major Sorcery, or every first rotation for the extra dot damage. So this should increase our spell damage. Right now we're at 2105 for our spell damage. Once we proc the Major Sorcery, then it should go up. And here we have 2502 for our spell damage. So you want to try to keep this up as much as possible for the extra damage. Plus, if you forget to hit that pot once again for the spell damage pot, then it's just a better way of keeping your overall damage up if you're more of a beginner or intermediate player. So there's two things that you're going to want to notice. So you hit Degeneration and you'll see the counter above the target. And after that expires, after the 12 seconds, what you'll also notice is that down below, you will have a hand with almost like a white star, and that is for your Major Sorcery. And the next thing we're going to look at is Barbed Trap. So this does physical damage, but it also does extra physical damage over time. The bigger part is the Minor Force, increasing your critical damage by 10% for that duration. So this is for 60 seconds, and it uses stamina, so it actually helps us with our sustain and magicka. This also stacks with our Boonstone, because right now we're using the Shadow, which increases our critical damage by 19%. So when we have Minor Force up, that is actually going to add another 10%, so we're up to 29% damage. So we're going to skip over Force Pulse for our front bar, and we're going to go to Haunting Curse. This does magicka damage. It actually explodes on the character twice. So the first time that you apply it, it'll explode after 3.5 seconds, and then after another 8.5 seconds, it'll explode again on the target, doing a lot of damage. So this, once again, you can see the timer for the 3.5 seconds up at the top over the enemy that you've placed it on, and then you can see that timer continue to count down as well. You also want to make sure that you're waiting for the second explosion to get the maximum amount of damage as well. So the next ability that we are going to look at is our Crystal Fragments. This does magicka damage, that's direct damage, that's around 12.2k. When you cast a magicka ability, you have a 35% chance of causing the crystal fragments to become instant, dealing 33% more damage, and costs 50% less magicka, which helps out with sustain as well. So what will happen is you want to cast these especially in between light and magicka abilities. So when you're doing your light attack weaving, you'll see that your crystal frags turns a purplish pink, which means that it's the instant cast. So when you're going through your rotation in that procs to where you see that pinkish purple, then you'll want to cast those crystal frags to get more damage and help with your sustain and magicka. Now there is a cooldown with it as well, so if you don't use it within a certain amount of time, it goes away, so be careful of that. If you accidentally hit your crystal fragment when it's not procced because you ran out of time, use a block to cancel the full cast of your crystal frags, because it'll save you magicka over the long run as well. So the next ability we're going to look at is the ultimate on our front bar. It's Shooting Star. It does flame damage, and then it also does damage over time as well. We're also going to look at our back bar with our Greater Storm Atronach, which does direct damage instead of AoE damage. The biggest thing about this is with the Charged Lightning, when you're running with a group, getting that 25% more damage for all of your teammates. So situational, you'll use this if it's mobs. You can use Shooting Star, get the ultimate back. You could also use it on bosses as well if you're soloing things. But you want to use that Storm Atronach as much as you can, especially during burn phases. So if you have a group of people over to your right, you don't want to drop it right on your tank or right on top of the boss itself. You actually want to drop it close or onto the group that you're running with, so that when you do drop that Atronach, they're able to synergize off of that to get that buff for the extra damage as well. So just keep that in mind when you're running, when to use it, when not to use it, and situations that you would use it in, especially with group play to maximize output damage. So now we're going to start trying to put things together with a rotation. So first thing that we're going to want to do is get our degeneration up. Then once we have that up, we're going to light attack, blockade, light attack, trap, bar swap. So that's what you want to have for your back bar with laying down your AoE and getting your dots up. This starts getting your spell damage up. It starts doing damage to not only direct damage in front of you, but anything that walks into that as well. So now we're going to start working in damage on our front bar. We start with degeneration, light attack, wall, light attack, put our barb trap down, then we're going to put Haunting Curse on the enemy. Now one thing that you want to make sure is that you keep Haunting Curse up so it does both of the explosions for the maximum amount of damage. So with this, once again, once you place Haunting Curse onto the enemy, it's going to stick onto that enemy, and then you have your timer above that enemy's head. So the first pop happens, then you want to wait as you continue to do your rotation. So once you come back around, you should be right at about where you can apply it again after that second pop happens from Haunting Curse. So the next part of this rotation is we're going to start adding in our light attacks and our force pulses. So we'll start off the same way as we have before with Degeneration, and then we'll do our light attack, we'll do our wall, light attack, barb trap, bar swap, throw our curse, light attack, force pulse, light attack, force pulse. And you'll do this over and over again with the rotation itself. If you keep an eye on the timers, by the time that second Haunting Curse pops, it's going to start the rotation over again. We'll also want to look out for our hands to glow a purple color, because that means that our frags have procced, and also on your bar it'll turn that pinkish purplish color, and you want to use those as much as possible. You can substitute those for one light attack or one force pulse. I'd probably substitute it for a force pulse over the light attack, because the light attacks do a lot of damage. So one of the biggest things is you just want to slow this down and practice this rotation. Once you get to the 21 mil test dummy, you're going to notice that it has a lot of buffs and debuffs on there. There's Worm's Raiment, Minor Sorcery, Minor Brutality, Minor Prophecy, Minor Savagery, Minor Berserker, Minor Toughness, Aggressive Warhorn, Major Force, Major Courage, Hirocine's Veneer, and Major Prophecy as well, which is actually from our Inner Light. So another thing also is with Sororias, you're going to notice once you start doing your Sororias, there's a stack in the bottom right-hand corner that starts counting up. So anytime you're doing light or heavy attacks, it'll gain a stack as well. It can stack up to 20, which increases your damage by 30 each stack. So you want to make sure you get that up to 20 altogether. When you get fully buffed with Degeneration, you'll notice your spell damage should be upwards of around 4482 for your spell damage, and your spell critical, once you have your pots up as well, is around 72.2% with that.